Tonight on Free Minds TV, we'll be discussing police mistreatment of a man with diabetes. We'll also be discussing child labor laws and how they might be extended to hurt family farmers, plus a cop in the UK who chased himself on closed-circuit television cameras. That coming up tonight on Free Minds TV.
Welcome to a brand new episode of Free Minds TV, where we challenge you, the viewer, to think outside the box. With you, as always, is Toby.
And Nick.
Got a lot to get into, Nick. We are going to be discussing the police officer who chased himself for about 20 minutes when he was identified as a suspicious subject in the UK with their closed-circuit camera system. We'll talk about that in the second half of the show, as well as a story about Amish milk and the federal government once again cracking down on them. We discussed a similar story to this 10, 20 times over the course.
I think we've reported on this exact case because this is sort of a
drawn
follow-up or this is a 2-year case that we're going to be discussing. So
it's more of those themes that continue to come up. If we haven't touched on this specific case, maybe it's a follow-up. If not, it's the same type of thing we talk about, as well as the federal government meddling in the workforce for farmers. I guess kids shouldn't be able to work on the farms. I don't know. We'll be getting.
They don't like it when kids work. Yeah. We need to disincentivize that as much as possible because they're too good at it, right?
Yes. Well,
that's the problem we have these days.
The danger's dangerous. It's to protect the children, of course, Nick.
Precious snowflakes.
Yes. Before we get into that, we do have a story coming out of Nevada where a man by the name of Adam Green, who is 38, settled his lawsuit against the city of Henderson and the state of Nevada on Tuesday night. Under the settlement, Green will receive $158,000 from the city, $35,000 from the state, and his wife will receive an additional $99,000 from the city. The payout settles a federal civil rights lawsuit that Green filed against Henderson City Police and the Nevada Highway Patrol, accusing them of battery, assault, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The lawsuit stemmed from an October 29, 2010 traffic stop in which portions were captured on the dashboard cameras of the Nevada Highway Patrol. Green was observed swerving in the eastbound lane of Lake Mead Parkway when he stopped at a traffic light. The Boulder Highway When he stops at a traffic light at the Boulder Highway intersection, he is approached by a trooper, who draws his service weapon, kicks the side of the window, and yells, "Don't move! Hey driver, don't move!" What happens next? Well, why don't we let you take a look for yourself.
Driver! Driver! Do not move! Do not move! Hey, come over here. Hands up! Hands up! Take him on the wrist so I can get him out. Do not move! Hey, driver, do not move! Car's moving. I got it! Go ahead. On the ground. Get on the ground! Stop resisting, motherfucker! Stop resisting, motherfucker! 692, we're trying to get him in custody right now for 43. I got it. Just worry about him. George 4692. Anybody hurt? Anybody hurt? I don't think she's medical. George 4692.
George 4692.
All right, we found some insulin in his pocket. Rule 52, tell him to expedite. He's semi-conscious. I got him. Thank you. Anybody hurt, guys? No. What about you, Troop?
No, I'm good.
You good?
Stay on your feet. This could be a death match. Could be.
Yeah, I see that. Hey, we got medical coming through. If you can. Charge 4692.
Charge 4692, go ahead.
All right, let's get medical out of here. He's a diabetic. He's probably in a shock. Semi-conscious.
You know, after that, Green was not charged in connection with the traffic stop. At a local hospital, he was treated for low blood sugar and multiple injuries that he said he received during the traffic stop. I ended up with 2 broken ribs. I had some cuts and a black eye on my face, Green told KTNV. I was confused, but I wasn't resisting, and but I wasn't resisting, and I think this would be incorrect and inappropriate behavior whether I was drunk or not. We're talking about the police, the way the police officers handled the situation. Despite the ordeal he has been through, Green, whose father is an Arizona state trooper, said his family does not hold a grudge. Well, kinda, you sued. We hold no ill will towards the officers involved or other police officers in the city, and we support them, and we're ready to move on. Except you sued. I guess if I had $300,000, I could say the same thing, but I mean, you sued, so I feel like Green might be fibbing here. According to the Las Vegas Review-Journal, Henderson police sergeant involved in the traffic stop was disciplined but remains employed by the department. So there you have it. The individual police officers, they didn't lose any money. They're still on the job. They cracked the guy's ribs and kicked him in the face when he was going through diabetic shock, but they're not the ones who lose out. It's the taxpayers. And for Green, I don't really understand that. How can Green say he holds no ill will when he was suing them for what they did?
Right.
Maybe he's forgiven now that he has the money, but I mean, he sued the city.
Right.
And
but that's the unfortunate thing, is it's the taxpayers that ended up paying, even though, these officers, one could understand why they would remove somebody from the vehicle, especially if they probably run into a lot more drunks and diabetic emergencies. So it's understandable if somebody's acting drunk and non-cooperative. I can understand why they removed him from the vehicle the way that they did.
You can?
But once they,
Why?
Once they have him on the ground, well, I mean, he had evaded arrest. I mean, he was in an altered state because he was in diabetic shock, but he still led the police on a chase.
Sorry, Nick,
I mean,
I don't
by the
see
time
the
you get
point.
that many
I don't
officers-
see the point for the aggression coming out from the traffic stop.
Well, once they
like
had
that.
him on the ground?
No, before that.
Well,
Can we just show the beginning clip one more time? This is what I don't understand. This part. Right from the beginning where he rushes up upon the car.
I saw the same clip.
Driver!
All right, good enough. That's what I don't get. That you say that's necessary to subdue a drunk person?
Well, a drunk, potentially armed person who had already evaded multiple
That
police
sounds like
cars.
if it's a drunk armed person, that's only going to get the person agitated and going to shoot them. That's not a way to de-escalate a situation, Nick.
There's, to some extent...
That's a very... if you're trying to de-escalate a situation, that's a foolish way to do so.
Well, if your primary focus is to de-escalate a situation, you just let him go. Period.
Okay.
You just let drunk drivers
But the
go.
guy's stopped now. You're going to rush at him with a gun drawn?
He's stopped in an odd place after evade. I mean, as far as the officers know, he's evaded several police cars.
Okay.
For what reason?
Well, it just says he was swerving, actually. It didn't say that he was evading. They said he was swerving. But the point being...
with that many officers, those guys didn't pile out of a clown car. They had probably been pursuing him for a period of time.
He stopped. But I don't understand the point in the level of aggression, running up and kicking the door
Because
and
potentially you might have to deal with somebody who's got a weapon, and you might have to shoot them.
And okay.
One of the best.
So you're going to rush the car?
Yeah. One of the reasons why they teach police to escalate verbally and to really intimidate people is because it's one of the most effective ways to avoid having to actually shoot them. If you overwhelm them and make them scared and make them crap their pants, they're less likely to reach for the gun and more likely to just put up their hands. There's a reason why they teach it that way. Now,
I don't know if that's necessarily
once they
true,
removed
Nick.
him from the vehicle,
that's
the reason why they teach it that way. If you ask an officer,
I'm not so sure that that's the case, Nick. My dealings with agitated individuals like this, which that's what I do for work, is you go in with this line of bullheaded thinking, it's going to escalate the situation and make it more violent.
This is the way that the police forces are trained. So I'm just telling you, that's what they're trained to do. And some people would argue that it may not be effective.
Seems foolish.
It may or may not be effective. you've got a situation once they have him on the ground, there's no reason to keep kicking the guy. You've already got him subdued. You've got 6 or 7 guys there. So clearly, they were just wantonly beating him at that point. But to use force to pull somebody over, well, he was evading arrest. Clearly he was, because with that many police there, they didn't have multiple cars on the scene.
I get that he's evading arrest, Nick. And I'm just saying that if that's the standard procedure of dealing with someone who's possibly evaded arrest like that, who's now stopped, running to them with a gun drawn and kicking the door and yelling and screaming and swearing, I don't see how you're planning on de-escalating a situation that way. That's what I don't get. I see that as a situation where the individual, if they are armed, dangerous, crazy, they're much more likely to act on that violence and draw their own weapon. I just see it as something that's going to cause a situation to become more dangerous, not less dangerous.
Yeah, but you have to remember, in a situation like this, the police, frankly, I think they should be attempting to de-escalate the situation, but their primary concern should be for the safety of the public at large. Not so much for the person who just ran from multiple cop cars.
If that's the case, then they shouldn't have pursued in the first place.
Well, maybe not. I mean, the guy was swerving, so his continued operation was a threat.
Well,
yeah, I mean, we can argue about whether the level of force was appropriate or not. They were executing an arrest on somebody who was, they had every reason to believe, a drunk driver who had evaded multiple police cars. Don't really have a problem with them being pretty stern about that.
Yeah, I think
but
it's inappropriate,
my problem comes when they beat a guy down once they already clearly have him under arrest. The threat situation's over, and the only reason to beat him is really just to inflict harm for the sake of it.
It's also because they've gone in with this bullheadedness where they have an adrenaline rush, and that's what they're going to do when you have that adrenaline rush because they're humans. You've kind of trained them to go in and act like animals, and now they've got the animal instincts, and that's what they're going to do because they've got the adrenaline pumping, because you've trained them to go in and kick the door with gun drawn and be screaming and yelling. It just doesn't seem necessary to me at all, Nick.
No, I mean, it doesn't look too great. I think it would have looked a lot different if they handled it better after the fact. Of course, what they did.
We wouldn't have even seen it if they had handled it better after the fact, Nick.
Right.
No one would have. This video never would have seen the light of day.
I think the initial aggression looks a lot worse because of where you see it ending up.
I don't know. The initial aggression is the worst part to me. The running at the car with the gun drawn is the most disturbing aspect of that video to me.
They'll pull. I don't really have a problem with them drawing a gun on somebody who's evading arrest in a motor vehicle.
Drawing a gun and staying back, that's one thing for your protection.
That cop was, you can hear him screaming in the video.
Drawing a gun and rushing up and screaming like that, that's the part that makes me nervous.
It looked like he was looking for an excuse to blast somebody.
Yes.
He could have handled it better.
Yeah.
All I'm saying
looked like he thought he was in a video game.
But to the, right, oh yeah. But they are probably, if you run from the police for a period of time and cruisers pile up behind you and you appear to be drunk, when you stop the car, they're probably going to pull guns on you. Now, this guy, unfortunately, was, in an altered state and not really through any fault of his own. He's got a medical condition. So that's unfortunate. And the officer who was whipping the gun out could have handled it a lot better, too. But they're probably going to pull a gun on you, and they're probably not going to talk very nicely to you.
I understand the point of the gun.
Once the situation's de-escalated.
That's not what I'm saying. I understand pulling the gun. Right. I just don't see the point in rushing the car and screaming like that. That's what my point is. Anyways, we do need to move on. There's other stories to get into. We need to talk about, what did we say? Child labor.
Child labor. It's a time-honored tradition. And unfortunately, the government is trying, and I'm not saying that completely facetiously. Unfortunately, some new proposed rules by the Department of Labor are going to put some strains on family farms, potentially. The U.S. Department of Labor introduced a new set of rules in late 2011 that prohibit workers under the age of 16 from working in manure pits and with certain animals unless their parents completely own the farm they're working on. So if you're a child of the owner of a farm, exclusively a family farm, not a farm owned by 2 or 3 families, but if your parents themselves own the whole farm, you can work on it regardless of these age restrictions. However, if you're another kid in the community, the next door neighbor, somebody who lives in town, you wouldn't be able to live
working on your grandfather's farm.
Your uncle's farm wouldn't count. It's only your immediate children can work on your farm. They also point out there's further restrictions saying that children under 18 would not be allowed to work in feedlots, grain elevators, stockyards, and livestock auctions. And obviously, a lot of the people are upset about this. This story is coming from the state of Iowa, but these are these are regulations that are going to be applied nationwide. So it's not just Iowans who are affected, it's anybody who runs a small farm. And small farms traditionally have relied on cheap labor from the surrounding community, seasonal labor, and quite often that's kids. That's why there's a summer vacation in many places. That's the actual reason why they stopped, children wouldn't be attending school in the summer, was because they were needed to work on farms. So it just points out
we don't need summer vacation anymore.
We don't need summer vacation anymore. We don't need kids to work anymore. And, frankly, most of this labor, when it's not filled by American kids, is going to be filled by immigrant labor, legal or otherwise. I mean, there are legal ways for, foreigners to work in the U.S. There are plenty of legal Mexican migrant workers on completely legitimate visas to do that. But this is what you're asking for with regulations like this, is that American kids won't work anymore until after they're out of high school, and we'll fill these jobs with foreign labor. And they're not the best paying jobs, but that cash, a lot of it does flow back to Mexico or Jamaica or any of these other places.
Or some of the smaller farms just simply won't exist anymore, the ones that don't have the money to pay, because a lot of the time the kids aren't really being paid much. It's like a pittance. I worked on my parents' farm when I was younger. Didn't really get rich doing that, Nick. It's more of, it just teaches you, what it taught me was a good work ethic, had fun working on the farm. And a lot of the kids who work on family farms, if they're going to take over the farm, where they get those skills is when they're kids working on the farm.
Yeah, I just think it's really unfortunate, though, because now we are seeing family farms and small, locally owned family businesses really being displaced by regulations that do favor either foreign labor, or most small family farms don't want to go through the paperwork, or they don't have the expertise. So it's just going to completely displace them, as you said, in favor of big factory farms. And I don't think it's, maybe some of these provisions are put in place in a well-intentioned way, but I would not at all be surprised to learn that regulations like this were lobbied for by big agribusiness to drive family farmers out. We've seen a lot of regulations coming out against small farms. And really, farms have been left untouched more than other small businesses. So in a way, this is just the state of affairs with the way the government regulates business catching up with agriculture now. Because most other family businesses got shut down long ago because of laws like this. Farms have enjoyed exceptions that have allowed them to keep functioning, but even they are now facing these same regulations that put a lot of other family businesses out of business.
Well, it hasn't gone through yet, right, Nick? But it probably will.
I believed it was
eventually.
I think it's still in the public comment period. It says the Department of Labor introduced a new set of rules in late 2011, but I don't believe they've been implemented yet.
As far as I've heard, we have talked about this one, I think, about a year ago on the radio show. It's gotten a lot of criticism so far. Not much. It hasn't really been embraced by people as of yet, but that's never stopped them before. All right, let's go over to the UK. The UK is always fun to pick on. And you know what? This could have happened to anyone. So I know that. But it's just humorous to talk about. It is fun to talk about funny stories, right? Why so serious after all? This coming from the Telegraph. An undercover police officer, quote, chased himself around the streets for 20 minutes after CCTV operator mistook him for a suspect. The junior officer, who has not been named, was monitoring an area hit by a series of burglaries in an unnamed market in the town, country south of the town. As the probationary officer from Sussex Police searched for suspects, the camera operator radioed that he had seen someone, quote, acting suspiciously in the area. The operator directed the officer, who was on foot patrol, as he followed the suspect on camera last month, telling his colleague on the ground that he was, quote, hot on his heels. The officer spent about 20 minutes giving chase before the sergeant came into the CCTV control room, recognized the suspect, and laughed hysterically at the mistake. The CCTV operator soon had the suspect on camera, and everywhere he saw the male, saw him like go around a corner, he would say, "You're hot on his heels. You're hot on his heels." But by the time the officer came into view, there was no trace. Oh, well, it could have happened to anyone, I guess, but I think it's funny.
Yeah, well, the CCTV technology that they have in the UK is creepy, but at least sometimes it does produce amusing video. I mean, I've seen quite a few clips.
The video hasn't been released, unfortunately.
No, that's unfortunate, because I've seen some pretty funny clips from their CCTV cameras. But, I mean, on a serious note, it is a little... I still don't like I don't know how it even relates to the story, but it does, bring up this idea of closed-circuit television cameras. And while it's a funny story, it's not so funny that basically every corner you turn around in most of these British cities, you're on camera all the time. I mean, that just doesn't seem... It makes for funny stories occasionally, but it just doesn't seem like a society I would want to live in.
Well, the other thing is it doesn't make the society any safer, really, either.
No, I mean, well, this story points out that just because they can see things on camera doesn't mean they interpret them correctly. And frankly, Britain has a lot of crime problems and a lot of youth crime problems. And while their homicide rate, I think, is lower, I mean, they have a lot of what they call antisocial behavior. And if you look at British society, it's certainly not a model of where I think most people viewing us here in the U.S. or in Canada would want to go. I mean, in many ways, it's a very stressed, strained society, and this nanny state approach of just putting cameras up everywhere really has not addressed the underlying problem. That was a rather draconian attempt to hack at some of the symptoms, and I really don't think it addresses a lot of the underlying problems with British society, which I think relate to big government. And we had riots in the UK not too long ago that point to that. I mean, you have massive youth unemployment and a whole host of other social ills, and that contributes to antisocial behavior. And the cameras just document it. Unfortunately, that's largely what they've done, is they've been able to document the failure of British public safety policy.
Well, we're not going to solve that one in a day.
No.
All right.
And it's not really our problem. I mean, except in as much
as we have similar problems here.
Well, yeah, but beyond, we can talk about what it might mean for us here in the U.S. But frankly, I mean, I have sympathy for some of you living in the U.K., but I don't live there. So.
True. Very true. All right, back to the farm. We should have had these stories back to back, but we didn't because we were back and forth. Let's talk about the Amish. Now, would the Amish, if this bill goes through, the child labor bill, if it goes through, would the Amish also be restricted from hiring children to work on farms?
Yeah, I believe so. I don't think there's any exemption written in.
Well, that would have a big effect on them because they're community oriented.
Yeah,
so
their economy still functions in much the same way that, rural towns used to function in the rest of the U.S. I mean, yeah. They're farming communities.
But I guess they don't really pay in money, so would that really affect them as much if you have a big barn raising and the payment is lunch? Does that count?
You'd have to talk to the Department of Labor about that. I don't know. And I know, the Amish are weird because some state governments, some federal agencies sort of look the other way on some things when it comes to the Amish. And then on other things they don't. So it's kind of this spotty, sporadic enforcement.
The triangle on the back of the buggy, that's a really big deal.
Right.
Milk, a really big deal.
But you can still poop in an outhouse if you want.
Not as big of a deal, I guess.
Yeah, I guess they'll give you that liberty. But the story we're talking about here, and I'm pretty sure this is one we have covered in the past, the FDA won its 2-year fight to shut down an Amish farmer who was selling raw milk to consumers in the Washington, D.C. region after a judge this month banned Daniel I believe it's Alger, from selling his milk across state lines, and he told customers he would shut down his farm altogether. The decision has enraged Mr. Alger's supporters, some of whom have been buying milk from him for 6 years, and say the government is interfering with their parental rights to feed their children. How about the rights to feed themselves, or the farmer's right to sell milk?
Maybe
those are once considered traditional liberties.
Maybe they themselves, they don't drink the milk. They just buy it for their kids.
I don't know. I think that was just an editorial spin that we put on it. But the Food and Drug Administration, which launched a full investigation complete with a 5 a.m. surprise inspection and a straw purchase sting operation against Mr. Alger's Rainbow Acres Farm, said unpasteurized milk is unsafe, and it was exercising its due authority to stop sales of the milk from one state to another. That part about due authority, I'm sure there's a piece of paper that says they have the authority to do so. Do I think it's legitimate for the FDA to tell farmers that they can't sell raw milk to people who want to buy it? No. I don't really think anybody has that authority, whether there's a piece of paper that tells them they can or not. And frankly, I think I do not care.
Is
what
it
the law
any
says.
raw milk?
I don't
or
think
is
the
it
customers here care what
just
the law
cow
says.
milk? What about goat milk?
I don't know. There's a lot of federal regulations, Toby.
Hamster milk.
There's probably a lot of federal regulations on milk, as you're pointing out, and I have not read them all, so I don't know.
You know, what baffles my mind is 2 years they've been investigating this. How many resources are they pouring into that? I mean, it's mind-boggling how...
They're going to make the defendant pay for all of that.
Oh, good. I'm sure the Amish man is rich.
Adding to Mr. Alger's troubles, Judge Lawrence F. Stengel said that if the farmer is found to violate the law again, he will have to pay the FDA's cost for investigating and prosecuting him. His customers like the milk, though, Toby.
I hope he's
They are
charging
outraged.
a lot because I'm sure that investigation wasn't cheap.
And one of his customers, the customers didn't want to speak on record because they're afraid about the FDA coming after them for purchasing unpasteurized milk.
I don't think they've been doing that.
I don't think they have either, but they still don't want to.
They're only
record.
going after the
Well,
suppliers.
they did transport
so
it across state lines, Toby, so that might be a federal offense right there. But one of the customers said anonymously to the Washington Times here, "I can't believe that in 2012 the federal government is raiding Amish farmers at gunpoint all over a basic human right to eat natural food." Very good point. The FDA, for its part, says that raw milk is dangerous and that if you pasteurize milk, it's better for you. I don't believe them. I'm not a nutritionist.
I believe them that it's dangerous. All foods are dangerous.
Dangerous?
Every year
How
you hear
dangerous?
Well, exactly.
They say the same thing about unpasteurized ciders. They say the same thing about all kinds of natural foods.
What was it, cantaloupe last year?
Right.
The muskmelon would make you die of some horrible disease, and then it was scallions.
And you also have to consider
food
that
is dangerous,
right,
Nick.
Right, and processed food is relatively safe in most respects from things like foodborne illness. But we also have to remember that in many cases, most cases, I would say, processed foods are just not as good for you. And people make the case that you break down a lot of the enzymes in the milk that help you digest it when you pasteurize it. And I'm not here to make a case for raw milk, per se. I just think you should let adults choose to drink the kind of milk they want without launching federal investigations over it. I mean, this is really this is the best thing that the federal government can do with the money that they take from us every tax season. This is the best application of our money.
I mean, the food that's in the fast food aisle, I mean, just like the crap that people eat, it's dangerous over the long term. I'm not saying that they should make it illegal. I'm just saying, relatively speaking, the food you eat is either going to be dangerous in the short term or long term or not so, but you should be able to make that decision on your own. It doesn't seem like
something's
going to
kill you.
Job. It's true, unfortunately. All right, well, we're out of time for this week. Send us your feedback. freemindstv.com is the website where you can get all the archives. Send us feedback. Donate us money. Thank you to those who have, and everything else. Until next week, it's been Toby here with you.
And Nick.
Have a good week.